Alex, as I call him, is a professor in the Department of Sociology and Criminology and Arts and Sciences, distinguished scholar at the University of Miami. He's also an esteemed member of the Melissa Institute Scientific Board. Dr. Piquero previously served as the director of the Bureau of Justice Statistics, one of the nation's 13 federal statistical agencies appointed by President Biden in 2022. Dr. Piquero is a nationally and internationally recognized criminologist with more than 26 years of experience. Over the course of his career, Dr. Piquero has given congressional testimony on evidence-based crime prevention practices and has provided counsel and support to several local, state, national, and international criminal justice agencies and elected leaders. His expertise ranges from criminal careers to criminal justice policy and crime prevention to the intersection of race, ethnicity, and crime with a focus on quantitative methodology. Dr. Piquero has published over 500 scholarly articles and several books and is among the most highly cited criminologists in the world. He has also served as editor of the Journal of Quantitative Criminology and the Justice Evaluation Journal. He is a fellow of both the American Society of Criminology and the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. In 2019, Alex received the Academy of Criminal Justice Science Bruce Smith Senior Award for outstanding contributions to criminal justice. And in 2020, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Division of Developmental and Life Course Criminology of the American Society of Criminology. I'll leave you now with Alex Piquero.
Thank you, Edioni, for the very kind introduction to my work and my career. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with everybody here at the Melissa Institute's 28th Annual Conference on Violence Prevention and Treatment. As Edioni said, I'm a professor of criminology and sociology at the University of Miami and the former director of the Bureau of Justice Statistics appointed by President Biden in June of 2022. Before I get into the roadmap of my presentation, I want to take a moment to thank our great mayor, Danielle Levine Cava, who I worked closely with over the few years on various efforts related to public safety. She is a champion of the work and also a champion of the evidence and the data. I'd also like to thank the local police departments here, Miami-Dade County Police Department, City of Miami Police Department, the Miami Beach Police Department, the South Miami Police Department, and all of the other agencies in town and the men and women who work tirelessly to keep our community safe, as well as the State Attorney's Office for their dedication on work in violence and gun prevention, and of course, Carlos Martinez in the Public Defender's Office, who's part and parcel of a really focused effort among all the public safety people here in Miami-Dade County to really focus on doing everything we can to keep safe and give them a viable path for the future. So my work today here is going to focus, Edioni, on things you and I have talked about a lot. And we've had many conversations about gun violence and what the data show and what the politics say and what the perceptions are. And so I think, as any good criminologist who loves data, we have to start with the facts. And this is important because the facts seem to have gone in different kinds of directions, depending upon which social media outlet or which media outlet you look at. So let's start with the data. As you know, I was the former director of the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and BJS has an incredible resource called the National Crime Victimization Survey, or the NCVS. The NCVS follows 200,000 people in 100,000 households every year and asks them questions about their victimization with the exception of homicide. It also asks about whether or not they report them, but that's a little bit secondary. But what I wanted to do here is show you what the rates look like for violent victimization by age group since the 1990s. You can see very clearly there's a high point then and a continuation drop all the way through. And that's an important piece of the puzzle. And that, again, that's self-reported victimization data. Where we are today is much better than where we were some 30 years ago. Now, I want to also go to now the FBI's data, and this is the percentage of all arrests by sex, by age, by year, by age group in the last few years. And I point this out by age group, for one main reason. There have been lots of discussions the last couple of years of a juvenile crime wave or a juvenile violent wave. Well, if that's the case, the data would support that. And as you can see here, it's certainly not the case. The percentage of all arrests seem to peak much later than early adolescence or mid-adolescence or late adolescence. And the same pattern holds when you look at murder and non-negligent manslaughter. So the discussion and some rhetoric that exists out in the world today about an onslaught of juvenile violence and juvenile crime, it is not borne out by the data at hand, both official records and the NCVS data. I think those complementary data sources are really important to put side by side and keep them at hand. Now, the last few years have not been the same. And so I started where we were in 1993 to really kind of level set what the data show and what's been happening. And of course, the pandemic hits. So what I've done here is plot for you data from an organization called the Council on Criminal Justice that I'm a member of. The council has a crime trends working group of which I'm the senior advisor for. And we have been tracking crime, especially homicide, in 32 U.S. cities, in big cities from the United States, that include Baltimore and Chicago, to smaller cities like Richmond. And these data here go from right before the pandemic started to end of year 2023. Now, these data are procured from law enforcement websites. And the FBI data for 2023 calendar year won't be out until the fall of 24. And so that's why we have a limited set of cities when we ran these analyses. So what you can see here in 2018 and 2019 on my left side staring at the screen is that we were still where we've been for a long period of time, pretty low relative to where we were. And of course, 2020 happens. And then everybody remembers the episodic spike that many U.S. cities saw with respect to violence, particularly homicide. And then you can see that's a sizable increase. Now, a lot of people have their specific, theory or reason why that spike happened. But I think it's really hard when a lot of things are going on at the same time. So, for example, one of the things that occurred, in February when people started to stay home, and then March when the world locked down, is kids were no longer in school. They weren't being exposed to teachers or counselors. All of the prevention and intervention efforts that we do day in and day out, they were taken off of the street as well. And moreover, in addition to that, the police were understaffed. A lot of them were sick. In fact, COVID was a significant cause of death among some officers. And then you have the stress and anxiety and all of those things. We know that there was an increase in alcohol sales, lots of other things that were going on as a result of COVID. And then the tragic killing of George Floyd on 25 May 2020. That set off a series of protests, not just in the US, but around the world. Some of those protests were related to violence, but it coincided with what we see in seasonality with respect to violence kind of increasing in the summertime. And that is what we saw in a lot of US cities. Not all. For example, St. Louis saw a real big spike in homicide in July 2020, but other cities like Baltimore and Detroit didn't. So there's always a national picture and there's always a local picture. Nevertheless, that trend continued into 2021. However, as we got into 2022, you can see the homicide rate, at least in these cities, starts to kind of go down. And in year-end 2023, we're still on the downtrend. And my purview of the 2024 quarterly data from the FBI and all of the websites and police departments I'm tracking, again, continue to show for most US cities, we're seeing at least single-digit declines or double-digit declines compared to where we were last year. So barring anything unforeseen or catastrophic, I perceive that year-end 24 will look a lot better than year-end 23. And I think we're going to be right kind of where we used to be before the pandemic. At least that's our hope. And again, all of those things that kind of turned off at the beginning of the pandemic now have basically been turned on in the as a result of the world kind of opening back up. So we just got to keep doubling down on the hard work that the men and women of the world are doing in respect to crime prevention. I want to turn now into the specific focus of today's conference, and that's on gun violence. Gun violence or firearm violence, as lots of people talk about it, this is a US problem. This is not an England problem. This is not an Australian problem. This is not a Canadian problem. It's not an Italian problem. It's a United States problem. So I recently published 2 papers that I want to highlight for you and show you why I think these are relevant to the discussion. The first one appeared in the Cambridge Journal of Evidence-Based Policing, and it was focused on racial inequality and firearm homicide victimization, but not other types of U.S. violence. The question I was motivated by was the following, very simple, straightforward. Is violent crime victimization among U.S. minority groups higher than for white Americans in general, or is there a distinct failure of equal protection by race with respect to firearm homicide? So how did I do this? Well, I examined per capita rates of violent victimization for Blacks, Hispanics, and whites, as reported in recent years remember the BJS National Crime Victimization Survey, is self-report data, as well as in the official firearms homicide data collected by the U.S. Center for Disease Control using local and state death certificates. So we're going to look at violent victimization using the self-report violent victimization and violent victimization looking at firearms from the CDC data. We'll start with the self-report victimization trends. The bar charts show on the my right-hand side the victimization rates for whites, Blacks, and Hispanics, and you can see that they are virtually identical regardless of violent crime type. And on the left-hand side, I've plotted the ratio, and you can see there the ratio is virtually 1-to-1. So when you look at violent self-report victimization over a period of time, there's no difference across race and ethnicity. However, when you plot this by firearms, the story is much different. At the bottom, the green line, that's the white firearm victimization rate, followed by the Hispanic firearm victimization rate, followed by the Black firearm victimization rate. You can easily do the math to compare the ratios. They are stable and they're sizable. So when we think about the problem of violent victimization in the United States, it's a certain kind of violent victimization among a certain group of people. I want to turn now to the issue of fatal and non-fatal shootings, and I want to highlight non-fatal shootings because in the United States, we do not have a national data collection on non-fatal shooting data. This is a problem. When I was the BGS director, I was co-chair of an interagency working group with members from the Domestic Policy Council, as well as the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And we were tasked with delivering to the President of the United States a document that talked about the status of police and crime data in the United States and where the gaps and challenges and opportunities were. And we highlighted non-fatal shootings. We have no national data collection on non-fatal shootings. I'm part of a group of individuals who are focused on building the infrastructure for firearm data broadly defined. We know that the White House's recently developed Office of Gun Violence Prevention is focused on non-fatal shootings as an important source of information. And there's lots of entities throughout the government that are really working to kind of provide this data for the country. Right now, it exists basically in local police departments. And as you see, I use the data from Boston. Boston is to be credited. The police department not only provides open portal data for people to download, but also includes fatal and non-fatal shootings. And they break it down by police district. Now, Boston historically has had fewer homicides than lots of other cities its size, but occasionally it has homicides, and it also has many more non-fatal shootings. And so what we were able to do is we were able to graph the non-fatal and fatal shootings by police district, and I did this along with a colleague and friend, Andy Wheeler. What we found was that 50% of all shootings occurred in 2 districts, in Roxbury and in Mattapan. Those districts happen to be heavily concentrated by minorities, primarily African Americans, as well as suffer economic disadvantage, much more so than the majority of other police districts do in the city of Boston. We also calculated the risk of being fatally shot in these 2 districts. For a Black male, they are almost double than in other districts throughout the city of Boston. Here we plot them for everybody, and you can see the darker the color, whether it's total, fatal, or non-fatal, are overrepresented in those districts of Mattapan and Roxbury in the middle part of the city. But what you also see is in other districts, they're nowhere near the numbers of those 2 districts. And that's an important question about, well, why is it the way it is here as opposed to other places? So now that we have some data in the background, let's talk about where we go with this and what we do with this. As I told you before, I was a member of the Council on Criminal Justice Violent Crime Working Group, another working group that occurred at the outset of the pandemic, and it was led by an individual named Thomas Abt. Thomas is also the founding director and associate research professor at the University of Maryland, where he heads up the Violence Reduction Center, the VRC. The group that I was part of is a series of academics, researchers, and policymakers. And we were focused on what the evidence shows with respect to violence prevention, both from a policing strategy and a non-policing strategy. This is very important because people think it's either police or it's non-police. And actually, you can't do one without the other. And so we put together a series of different groups that kind of assess the evidence, and we came up with a series of different efforts that are very good. They work, they reduce crime, they reduce violence, and they're translatable across jurisdictions. We put this together in this report that you can easily download into a PDF, and it's easily readable with the appropriate citations. And it's called Saving Lives: 10 Essential Actions Cities Can Do to Tackle and Reduce Violence Right Now. This report, largely at Thomas's behest, has been incorporated into several cities' violence crime reduction plan throughout the United States. And we're really glad to see a lot of people refer to it. In fact, the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs has actually lifted this up as a model violence crime prevention strategy. So we're very heartened by that, and we hope that it's useful for people. And of course, they need to modify it for their local jurisdictions, but we hope that it serves as a good resource going forward. Now, where do we go with that in mind? When I think about violence prevention, I think about the 15-year-old kid who might pick up a gun tonight, the 10-year-old kid who in 5 years might pick up a gun tonight, and the 5-year-old kid who in 10 years might pick up a gun. And so that necessitates efforts that are prevention long-term, intervention short-term. And as Piquero said in his book On Crimes and Punishments, it's better to prevent crime than to punish them. I've gone on record with evidence from several meta-analyses that I've led that show that one of the best things you can do is self-control modification programs, or just teaching kids self-control. And it's not that just self-control prevents crime and delinquency, it also has many other positive aspects. Increased employment, increased educational outcomes, better interpersonal skills, lower drug and alcohol use. It just has so many touch points, because basically it's teaching people to consider the long-term consequences of their actions. One of the great efforts is actually led by one of the scientific advisory board members of the Melissa Institute, Lina Omari, and who's based in Canada. That's where Stop Now and Plan actually started. They have a really cool elephant logo. And it's actually been translated throughout the United States, being used in Florida and lots of other places throughout the US. It's effective for boys and girls and across race and ethnicity as well. And that's really important, because that says, look, everybody can learn self-control, and self-control is important for everybody. And my meta-analyses with my colleagues showed that these programs not only improve self-control, but they reduce delinquency and crime. Many of you are also familiar with the David Old's nurse home partnerships. There are other kinds of early family parent training programs. They all are kind of designed to do the same kind of thing. Teach parents how to deliver self-control to the kids and how the kids can adopt self-control. Other things, of course, everybody's familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive skills development. These are things designed for crime prevention. Now, you can't do the right now with things that take a long time. So now you have the intervention efforts. And when I think about intervention, I think about how we work with the community, not at the community. Here we have focus and equitable hotspots patrol. So when you're patrolling areas that have high degree of violent places, or we know that violent individuals are in those locales, you are doing policing in a fair and equitably, procedurally just way, as a lot of police training has really moved in that direction, and largely at the heels of National Academy of Sciences report, as well as a report that President Obama commissioned on 21st century policing. We know that hotspots patrol and problem-oriented policing targeted in certain areas is very effective. We also have an evidence base that's emerging on community violence interruptions. I think you'll hear from Wayne Rawlings and several other people later on in the panels about this idea of community violence interrupters. And it's a big umbrella term, but basically what you're doing is you're training individuals, whether they're ex-offenders or social workers or trained professionals, to get right into the street and to stop social beefs that happen on social media, or high-risk kids from picking up that gun and solving that problem with a gun in their hand rather than having a conversation. The DOJ has just invested several $100 million over the last couple of years in CBI programs at a local level throughout the United States, including here in Miami-Dade. And the idea is to put infusion of resources to do programmatic and then also evaluative components. So I'm looking forward to seeing CBI as one part of an overall crime prevention strategy. And the last one is cleaning and greening. This seems so simple, but the evidence is also very clear. My colleague John McDonald at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as colleagues throughout the country, have looked at what cleaning and greening is and what it does to community crime rates. And this is taking dilapidated buildings and making them new and investing in the community. So, putting up parks and rec, tearing down abandoned buildings, putting new facilities there for people in the community to see. Because as I've said in print all along, you can be smart on crime by being smarter on people and smarter on places. And I think what an overall crime and violence and gun prevention strategy does is it focuses on the short term, it focuses on the long term. It uses the police, it uses the educational system, it uses the social work system, the healthcare system. All of these individuals have a role to play in public safety. And I think here in South Florida, we're very fortunate to have a community where all of the people involved in the criminal justice decision-making apparatus are all laser focused on how do we improve the lives of kids now and how do we create a better future for kids tomorrow. I'm so thankful that the Melissa Institute is a key partner here in South Florida at bringing together groups to focus on strategies and efforts and evaluations, but also the Institute serves as a model organization around the country in terms of its trainings and educational webinars and those kinds of things. You have a group of committed individuals, and looking at the panel of the rest of the day, it's a very exciting one. There's great people, there's researchers, there's academics, there are community organizers, there's people who have touch points all over the place. And as I said at the outset of my presentation, I'm so thankful that we have a leader in Miami-Dade County and Mayor Danielle Levine-Cava, who has public safety as one of her pillars. She's invested in public safety. She's invested in getting this community to be better and safer for the people now and in the future. And all of the people in this area are so committed to this. So I'm thankful to be part of this area. I'm thankful to be part of the Melissa Institute. And I'm so thankful that several of you got up early on a Friday morning to view my presentation. And as well, I invite you to stick around for the rest of the day. Several of these people are my friends and colleagues, and I know you're going to learn a lot about the work that they're doing. And I look forward to hearing from you in due course and learning much more from what everybody's doing locally and nationally. Thank you very much.